They said a woman like Mary Cole didn't deserve to live, not after birthing 11 children, from 11 different men. Some called her a sinner, others a whore, and many wanted her dead. But none of them knew the truth. Every child she carried was born out of violence, hunger, or survival. And the night the men of the county came to take her children by force, Mary didn't scream, didn't cry. She just looked at them with dead, burned-out eyes and said, "If you touch even one of them, you'll have to kill me first." Mary Cole had lived most of her life on the edge of Virginia's forgotten fields, where the soil was thin, the trees leaned under their own memories, and the air carried the smell of tobacco dust and old sins. Her house stood at the end of Mulberry Road, a crooked structure with a roof that dipped like a tired shoulder, and windows that rattled even when the wind was still. Most people in the county avoided passing it at night. Some said it was haunted. Others whispered that the house itself had soaked up too much grief, too many cries, too many secrets. But Mary knew the truth. The house wasn't haunted. It was simply tired, the same way she was. She hadn't been born there. She had wandered through much harsher places before fate pushed her into that sagging doorway. Mary came into the world as the youngest daughter of a woman who never smiled and a father who drank away the family's last pennies. She learned early that life didn't hand anything gently. It tore, it scraped, it demanded. By the time she was 10, both her parents were dead, one from sickness, the other from winter cold, and she was sent to live with her aunt, a woman as hard as dried corn husks and twice as brittle. Her aunt used her as cheap labor, cleaning, cooking, tending animals, hauling water. At 14, Mary was already strong from work and weak from hunger, and at 16, fate found her in the worst possible way. The Hale plantation sat just beyond the tree line, a place as large and powerful as it was cruel. Jonathan Hale was one of the wealthiest landowners in the county, a man whose boots never touched mud and whose eyes were always calculating. Mary had seen him from afar many times, riding his horse along the edge of the fields like a king surveying land. He believed God himself had gifted to him. One summer evening, when the air was thick with heat and the sky glowed red like burning coals, Hale approached her aunt's house. He needed extra hands for the harvest season, he said. Strong hands, young hands. Mary didn't get a choice. Her aunt accepted, before Mary even understood what was happening. Working at the plantation felt like entering a different world. Everything was bigger, harsher. The fields stretched farther than she could walk in a day. The overseers yelled so loud the crows flew up from the trees. The enslaved workers bent their backs until sweat soaked the soil beneath them. Mary had never seen such misery gathered in one place, and yet she had no idea that soon her own life would tie itself to that land forever. It was on her 3rd week there that Hale noticed her. Really noticed her. He approached her while she scrubbed the steps behind the main house. He asked her age. He asked where she lived. He asked if she was alone in the world. And then he asked her to come inside. Mary didn't want to. Every instinct screamed no. But a girl in her position had no power, no voice, no protection. And so, that night, in a room too polished and too quiet, Mary learned the truth about men like Jonathan Hale. By early spring, she found herself carrying his child. She was 16, terrified, and alone. Her aunt threw her out the moment she discovered the pregnancy, claiming Mary had brought shame into the house. With nowhere else to go, Mary walked until her legs gave out and her vision blurred. It was an older widow, Mrs. Green, who found her collapsed near the creek and took her in. The widow offered her food, helped her through the pregnancy, and asked no questions. She was the closest thing to kindness Mary had ever known. When Mary's daughter was born, a small, quiet child with dark eyes, Mary named her Anna, after the grandmother she had never met, but always imagined as gentle. For a while, life felt almost bearable. Anna was the one good thing she had ever held. Her laughter could cut through even the thickest sorrow. And in the months that followed, Mary learned that motherhood didn't weaken her. It gave her a spine made of iron. But peace has a short life in places like Virginia. When Mrs. Green died suddenly during a harsh winter, Mary was forced to leave the house. She carried Anna on her hip and walked through town with no plan, no money, and no support. Eventually, she found a small empty cabin at the end of Mulberry Road. It was abandoned, broken, and leaning toward collapse, but Mary claimed it as her own. She patched the holes, cleaned the floors, and lit her first fire inside the hearth on a cold February night. Anna slept beside her, wrapped in a blanket made from old curtains. Mary whispered into the darkness, "We'll survive. Just you and me." But fate wasn't done with her. A year later, while buying flour and lard at the general store, she met Elias Turner, a young farmer with kind hands and desperate eyes. He lived alone on a plot of land that was failing faster than he could save it. Elias wasn't cruel. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't dangerous. What he was lonely. And loneliness can pull two people together in ways neither expects. Their connection started with small things. Shared meals, short conversations, help carrying bags. One spring afternoon, when the wind smelled of warm earth and rain, Elias kissed her behind the barn. Mary didn't push him away. She wanted to feel wanted without fear. But love and stability were different things. Elias wasn't ready for the responsibility of a woman and child, let alone another child on the way. When Mary became pregnant with his son Benjamin, Elias panicked. He promised he would marry her, then changed his mind. He promised he would help, then disappeared 4 days. Finally, on a humid August morning, he packed his few belongings and left Virginia altogether. He never met his son. Benjamin was born screaming, loud, fiery, and stubborn, as if he already sensed he'd need to fight for every scrap of dignity. The world denied him. Anna adored him. She carried him around the yard, pointing out birds and flowers, whispering stories into his ear as if she could protect him by filling his tiny world with wonder. Mary grew stronger after Benjamin's birth. She worked more hours, picked up laundry jobs, and occasionally sold herbs and remedies to the neighbors. People whispered about her, a young woman with 2 children and no husband. But she ignored them. Survival leaves no room for shame. The next year, a traveling merchant passed through town with a wagon full of ribbons, spices, and glass bottles that shimmered in the sun. He was charming, smooth-tongued, and knew exactly how to make a woman feel seen. Mary wasn't naive. She knew what he wanted. She also knew she was lonely, exhausted, and hungry for even the smallest piece of tenderness. He stayed for 1 night. 9 months later, Mary gave birth to Lucy, a fragile baby girl with pale hair and delicate fingers. Lucy was the quietest of Mary's children, a child who seemed to belong more to dreams than to the real world. She rarely cried. She rarely fussed. She simply looked around with big, curious eyes as though trying to understand why life had placed her here. It was during this time that the people of the county truly began to notice the woman, living at the end of Mulberry Road with 3 children and no husband in sight. Their looks grew sharper, their questions more intrusive. Mary learned to keep her head low and her doors locked. On a cold evening in late November, Mary stood outside her house, watching the moon rise above the treetops. The wind whispered through the branches, and the forest felt alive with secrets. Anna and Benjamin slept inside. Lucy lay bundled in a cradle near the fire. The house was quiet, but Mary's thoughts were loud. She thought about the past, the plantation, Hale's heavy footsteps, her aunt's rejection, Elias' cowardice, the merchant's false tenderness. She thought about how every choice she made seemed chained to suffering. And yet she also thought about Anna's laughter, Benjamin's stubborn smile, Lucy's soft fingers curling down hers. The world had taken much from her, but her children, they were the pieces she refused to surrender. As Mary stared into the forest, she sensed something shifting in the air. A storm, perhaps, or fate gathering itself for another blow. She didn't know then that soon her life would entangle once more with the plantation. She had tried so desperately to escape. She didn't know that the choices she made next would carve scars across the next 20 years of her life. She didn't know that her family, her strange, chaotic, beautiful family, would grow until the county whispered her name with contempt. But she felt it, deep in her bones. And on that night, standing barefoot in the cold dirt, Mary Cole whispered a promise to the darkness. No matter what they take from me, I will keep my children alive. It was a promise the world would soon test with fire, violence, and heartbreak. The first of many promises she'd be forced to make, before the story of her 11 children truly began. The winter that followed Lucy's birth settled heavy over Mulberry Road. Frost clung to the window frames each morning, and the trees stood like thin, frozen skeletons. Mary wrapped her children in blankets, cooked whatever she could afford, and prayed that the cold would pass quickly. But even as the seasons softened, something darker began to move toward her life, like a shadow stretching across the ground before the man casting it could be seen. Jonathan Hale returned. It began with small signs, footprints near her property, the distant sound of hooves at night, the uneasy glances from neighbors who suddenly looked away when she passed. Mary knew these warnings. She had lived under Hale's shadow before, and now, years later, the weight of that shadow felt heavier than ever. One morning, while she was hanging wash sheets in the cold sun, a carriage approached her house. She froze. Anna and Benjamin stood on the porch behind her, watching with wide eyes as the black horses stopped at the edge of the yard. Jonathan Hale stepped out, elegant as always, his coat pressed, his boots polished clean, despite the muddy road. His presence felt wrong here. Too refined, too silent, too sharp. "Mary," he said, as if greeting an old friend. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "What do you want?" Hale smiled, though his eyes held no warmth. "I heard you're raising quite a family out here." She felt the blood drain from her face. "It's none of your concern." "Oh, but it is," he replied. "You forget, one of those children is mine." Anna, who stood quietly behind Mary, flinched. She was old enough now to understand words she wasn't meant to hear. Mary stepped in front of the children, placing herself between them and the man who had shaped her life with cruelty. "I do not owe you anything," she said. "Leave." Hale's smile faded. His voice dropped to a quiet, dangerous calm, the tone he used the night he first pulled her into the main house years ago. "You owe me your obedience, Mary Cole." The sentence stung like a slap. She forced herself to breathe. "I am not one of your slaves, Mr. Hale." He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "Everything in this county belongs to me one way or another." Mary's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "You have no claim here. That house you live in," Hale said, gesturing toward her home, "stands on land I own. You're trespassing." She hadn't known. The cabin was abandoned, forgotten. No one claimed it, or so she thought. "What do you want?" she asked. Hale's eyes drifted past her to Anna, then to baby Lucy sleeping in the cradle near the door. "You will come back to the plantation. I need a housemaid again. Someone I can trust." Mary shook her head immediately. "No." Hale didn't argue. He simply turned, stepped into his carriage, and delivered a quiet threat. "You'll come willingly or you'll come because you have no choice." The carriage rolled away, leaving behind the echo of a future Mary desperately wished he could outrun. For several weeks, life carried on, but unease lived in every corner of the house. Mary noticed unfamiliar faces near her property, men she didn't recognize, men who didn't bother to hide that they were watching. Then one night, someone knocked on her door long after the children had fallen asleep. Mary froze. She knew that knock, slow, heavy, deliberate. She opened the door just enough to see who stood outside. "Hale, you didn't come," he said. "So now I've come to collect you." Mary stepped outside, closing the door behind her so her children wouldn't wake. "I told you no. And I told you what would happen." He signaled with his hand. Two figures emerged from the darkness, overseers she recognized instantly. The same men who had whipped enslaved workers at the plantation. Their faces looked carved from stone. "We can do this quietly," Hale said. "Or loudly. Your choice." Mary's chest tightened with fear and fury. She thought of Anna's bright eyes, Benjamin's fierce spirit, Lucy's fragile breath. She knew she couldn't protect them if Hale decided to act. "Let me speak," she said. Hale nodded. "You and I both know you're not here because you need a maid," Mary said. "You're here because you think you can take whatever you want." Hale smirked. "I don't think it, Mary. I know it." She felt something harden inside her, the kind of resolve born only from suffering. "You may own half this county," she said, "but you will never own me again." Hale stepped closer, his voice venomous. "Do you want your children to starve? Because without my mercy, that's what will happen." Mary lifted her chin. "I'd rather starve on my feet than bow on my knees." Hale stared at her, his eyes cold and calculating. "Two children of mine live under your roof. If I file a claim, the law may very well listen." Mary's breath caught. He was right. The law was not made to protect women like her. It was made to protect men like him. Before she could answer, Lucy began to cry from inside the house. Hale's gaze shifted to the door. "That's the younger one, isn't it?" he asked softly. "The quiet one." Mary stepped between him and the entrance, her voice sharp as a blade. "You stay away from her." He studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to leave. "This isn't over," he said. The overseers followed him into the night, leaving Mary trembling, not from cold, but from the certainty that she had just invited war into her life. Days later, the war began. Mary received a notice, stamped with the county seal. She was being summoned to the courthouse. Hale had filed a petition questioning her ability to raise her children. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. Rumors of immorality, neglect, unfitness. People she barely knew whispered behind her back. Some pointed. Others crossed the road to avoid her. Hale had crafted his trap well. Mary sat at her table that night, watching the fire dim into embers. Her children slept close beside her, unaware that the world outside wanted to break their small, precious circle. She whispered to each of them, touching their hair, memorizing the rise and fall of their breaths. "I will not lose you," she said quietly, "no matter what he does." But even as she spoke, fear clawed at her ribs. She had seen what Jonathan Hale did to the enslaved men and women under his rule. She had seen how little the law cared about their suffering. And she knew that if he won, if he truly meant to take her children, he would destroy them in ways the world would never see. Mary Cole had survived hunger, abuse, abandonment, and poverty. But the shadow of Jonathan Hale was darker than any winter. And now it was spreading across her home, her children, and everything she loved. The door creaked softly as a cold wind pushed through the cracks. Mary looked up, staring into the darkness outside. Somewhere in that darkness, she sensed movement. Someone watching, waiting. The war had begun. And soon, it would demand a price she wasn't yet ready to pay. Mary Cole had always believed that suffering came in waves. Strong enough to knock you off your feet, but brief enough to let you stand again. What she didn't know was that sometimes the waves never stopped. Sometimes they rose higher, darker, heavier, until they swallowed everything a person tried to build. The weeks following Hale's threat became a storm that refused to pass. Every morning Mary woke before dawn, feeding the children in silence, while her mind chased fears she dared not speak aloud. She washed clothes, swept floors, cut firewood, held Lucy close when her breathing grew faint, and prayed that the notice from the courthouse was nothing more than a cruel attempt to frighten her. But deep down she knew Jonathan Hale wasn't bluffing. A man like him did not depend on fear alone. He depended on power, and he possessed more of it than Mary could ever hope to fight. Still, she tried. She kept her children close. She taught Anna how to watch the tree line for unfamiliar figures. She warned Benjamin never to speak to strangers. She slept lightly, waking at even the slightest sound. And though she never told them the truth, Her children sensed that danger hung over their home like a storm cloud refusing to move. But Mary was not alone in her struggle. There was someone else, someone who had been watching her for months, though not with the eyes of a predator or a master, but of a man who had recognized in her the same quiet hunger for connection. His name was Samuel. He worked the fields on Hale's plantation, a slave who had survived more pain than any man should endure. Mary had first noticed him earlier that year, when she had gone down to the river to wash blankets. He was chopping wood nearby, sweat soaking his shirt, his breath steady and controlled. Their eyes met for only a moment, but something passed between them, something Mary couldn't explain. A softness, a familiarity, a recognition. She returned to the river again the next week, hoping to see him. She told herself it was coincidence. It wasn't. Samuel always kept a respectful distance, always moved carefully so she wouldn't feel threatened. The first time he spoke, his voice was calm, deep, cautious. "You carry a lot," he said gently, nodding toward the heavy basket in her hands. Mary didn't answer. She didn't trust strangers. But something about the way he spoke, without pity, without judgment, eased a tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Over the weeks that followed, they exchanged small conversations. Nothing dangerous, nothing intimate. But in those quiet moments by the river, Mary felt a kind of peace she had never known. Samuel talked about the sky, the crops, the river after rainstorms. He talked about the songs his mother used to hum, about the nights when he and the others whispered stories to comfort each other. When the overseers grew violent, he spoke slowly, with long pauses between sentences, as if every word he offered her had been weighed, tested, chosen with care. Mary found herself waiting for his voice, and Samuel, though he never said it aloud, waited for hers. One evening she told him about Anna and Benjamin. She told him how Anna had started reading books she found in the old schoolhouse, how Benjamin climbed everything he could like he was determined to touch the sky. Samuel smiled at that, a real smile, rare and warm, a smile that made Mary feel something she hadn't felt in years, the memory of hope. But it wasn't until the night she found him bleeding behind the barn that their connection crossed the line from gentle to desperate. He had been whipped, harshly, cruelly, for speaking up when an overseer struck a young boy who had collapsed from exhaustion. Mary found Samuel lying in the dirt, his back torn open, blood soaking through the thin fabric of his shirt. Without thinking, she ran to him. She knelt beside him, tearing cloth into strips, cleaning his wounds with trembling hands. "You'll be killed if someone finds you here," Samuel whispered. "And you'll die if I leave you," Mary replied. For the first time, Samuel looked at her not with guarded calm, but with a raw, unfiltered vulnerability. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. Mary swallowed hard. "Because someone should." He exhaled slowly, as if her words had lifted a weight he'd carried for years. That night changed everything. She visited him again the next, and the next. She brought food, water, herbs, thread. And as the days passed, their conversations grew longer, deeper. Samuel told her how he had been taken from his mother at 12, sold 3 times, and beaten more times than he could count. Yet somehow, through all of it, he remained gentle. He refused to let the world turn him cruel. Mary told him about Hale, about her children, about the night Hale threatened to take them. She didn't cry. Mary had forgotten how to cry years ago. But Samuel saw the fear behind her eyes. He reached out, taking her hand in his, and said softly, "You're not alone." It was the first time anyone had ever said those words to her. Their love did not happen quickly. It did not explode like fire or rush like the river after a storm. It grew slowly, quietly, in stolen moments and whispered confessions. It grew in the way Samuel looked at her children, with kindness instead of judgment. It grew in the way Mary stood a little straighter when he was near. It grew in the way their hands found each other even in silence. When Mary found herself pregnant again, she didn't panic. She didn't feel shame. She felt something startling, something she had no name for, something like gratitude. The child was Samuel's. She told him, by the river at sunset. His reaction wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was a trembling inhalation, followed by a soft, disbelieving smile. A child, he whispered. Our child. For a moment, they both let themselves imagine a different life. A life where Samuel was free, where Mary wasn't hunted, where their children could grow without fear. But dreams like that had no place in Virginia's soil. Their daughter Grace was born in early autumn. She had Samuel's deep brown eyes and Mary's calm expression. Samuel held her only once, secretly, under the cover of night, while the others slept. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he touched her tiny hands. I will die before I let harm come to her, he said. Mary believed him. 2 years later, Mary bore another child, a boy she named Joshua, also Samuel's son. But this time, Hale noticed. He saw the child's dark skin, the shape of his eyes, the unmistakable resemblance. He knew, and when Hale knew something, he acted. One afternoon, when Mary went down to the river, Samuel was gone. Rumor spread quickly. He had been punished, then sold, then punished again. No one knew for certain. No one dared ask. Mary searched for him for nearly a year. Every field, every work crew, every whisper she could find. Finally, she found a man who knew the truth. Samuel had been locked in a barn for speaking to a white woman. He had been beaten nearly to death. Hale planned to sell him south, far south, where men were worked until their bodies broke. But before the sale, Samuel tried to run. They caught him. Mary never learned whether he died from the beating or from the chains. She never learned whether he cried out her name or remained silent. She only knew he was gone. And now she had 4 children without their father, and 2 who carried the blood of a love the world forbade. Her family continued to grow, not through desire, but through survival, through circumstances she could not control. Isaac, born after a brief encounter with a stable hand who offered her food during a harsh winter. Hannah, the quiet, fragile child conceived with a schoolteacher who promised her marriage, then vanished before sunrise. 11 children over the years, 11 stories carved into her life, 11 names whispered each night as she prayed for strength. But tragedy always waited nearby. Lucy, her pale, delicate daughter, fell ill with fever during a humid June. Mary did everything she could. Herbs, cold cloth, whispered lullabies, prayers whispered so fast they melted into each other. But Lucy's breasts grew shallow, her skin burned with heat. And one night, just before dawn, her heart stopped. Mary held her daughter's lifeless body until the sun rose. Anna covered her face and sobbed. Benjamin punched the wall until his knuckles tore. Grace cried silently. Joshua clung to Mary's dress, confused and terrified. Mary didn't cry. Her grief had carved itself too deep for tears. That night, when the children slept, Mary lit a single candle and whispered their names. All of them, like a mother counting her losses and her miracles. Anna, Benjamin, Lucy, Thomas, Sarah, Grace, Joshua, Isaac, Hannah. 9 voices left. 2 souls gone. Lucy and Samuel. She whispered their names into the darkness, and the wind carried them through the trees. She didn't know that soon the world would hear those names too, not with tenderness, but with suspicion and hatred. She didn't know that the county would turn her children into weapons against her. She didn't know that everything she loved would soon be threatened again. But she felt a warning in her bones. The storm wasn't ending. The storm was only beginning. The death of Lucy settled over the house on Mulberry Road like a cold fog that refused to lift. 4 weeks. The children moved softly, speaking in hushed tones, as if any loud sound might shatter the fragile silence Mary desperately tried to protect. At night she sat by the hearth, staring at the glow of fading embers, feeling as though a part of her soul had been buried with her daughter. But grief, like hunger, was something Mary had learned to swallow quietly. Life didn't pause for pain. Not for her, not for the poor. not for those the world had already forgotten. And outside her door, the world was changing. She sensed it first in the way neighbors stopped greeting her. Women who once bought herbs from her now crossed the street without meeting her eyes. Men whispered when she entered the general store, watching her with expressions that mixed pity, curiosity, and contempt. Children pointed at her house, giggling until their mothers slapped their hands and dragged them away. Mary didn't know what rumor had reached town. Not yet. But she felt its weight long before she heard its words. One morning, as she stood at the well drawing water, an older woman approached her. Mrs. Dunning, known for her loose-tongued and sharper opinions, stopped a few feet away and folded her arms across her chest, as though protecting herself from contamination. "I heard," she said coldly, "what you've been hiding." Mary didn't answer. She simply kept drawing water. 11 children, Mrs. Dunning continued, and every one from a different man. She spat into the dust. Shameful. Mary didn't react. She had lived with shame being thrown at her like stones for years. But Mrs. Dunning wasn't finished. "They're saying some of your children ain't white." Her voice lowered. "They're saying you laid with slaves." Mary's fingers tightened on the rope. The bucket trembled. "Is it true?" the woman demanded. "Is it?" Mary pulled the bucket from the well, steady and slow. "It's none of your concern." Mrs. Dunning's eyes widened with offense. "It's everyone's concern. There are rules in Virginia. There is order. A woman like you breaks it, and people get hurt." Mary set the water bucket down without a word. She lifted it, turned, and walked away, refusing to give Mrs. Dunning the satisfaction of an argument. But the whisper had begun. By afternoon it had spread across the market. By evening it had reached the church. By night it had become the county's favorite story, twisted, exaggerated, sharpened into something dangerous. They said Mary slept with anyone who passed her door. They said her children were bastards, half-breeds, criminals waiting to happen. They said God had cursed her house. And worst of all, they said Jonathan Hale had finally decided to do something about it. The next morning Mary found hoof prints near her house, deep, fresh, circling like wolves testing a fence. She didn't need to guess whose men had made them. Hale was watching, waiting, preparing. Over the next week, the whisper grew into a roar. Mary couldn't walk into town without hearing fragments. "She's a disgrace. She should be locked up. Those children ought to be taken. She's dangerous." The cruelty didn't surprise her. What surprised her was how quickly people believed every lie, every exaggeration, every poison-laced rumor. The truth never mattered. Her suffering never mattered. All that mattered was the story. And the story of a woman with 11 mysterious children was far too tempting for a bored and bitter community to ignore. Then, one rainy afternoon, the nightmare arrived in the form of a knock. A heavy, official knock. Mary opened the door to find 2 county men standing beneath dripping hats, holding papers stamped with red wax. Their eyes slid over the children behind her, and a tense, unprotective. Benjamin bracing himself like a small bull, Grace clutching her mother's dress. Joshua and Isaac huddled together, Hannah peeking from the bedroom doorway. "Mary Cole?" the taller officer asked. "Yes. We've received a petition from Mr. Jonathan Hale," he said, pulling out a document. "He claims concern for the welfare of the children. There are questions about their upbringing, living conditions, and paternity." Mary felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "He wants a formal assessment," the man continued. "We are obligated to inspect the home, speak to the children, and evaluate whether they are in safe, moral hands." Mary's pulse hammered like a drum in her throat. "My children are safe," she said. "They are fed. They are cared for." "That may be," the officer replied gently, "but the county must determine that for itself." The men stepped inside without waiting for permission. They examined every room. They opened cupboards, lifted blankets, checked for leaks, cracks, damage. They questioned Anna and Benjamin, asked them who their fathers were, whether Mary hit them, whether they went hungry, whether they felt loved. Anna answered with calm defiance. Benjamin answered with anger. The officers wrote everything down. When the inspection ended, the taller man handed Mary another piece of paper. A hearing will be held in 2 weeks, he said. The children may be removed if the court rules in favor of Mr. Hale. Benjamin stepped forward, fists clenched. You're not taking us. The officer knelt to face him. That's not for me to decide, son. Mary pulled Benjamin close, her voice steady but trembling underneath. Thank you. You may go. When the door closed behind them, the silence exploded. Anna broke down in tears. Grace hid beneath the table. Joshua asked if the men would come back with guns. Isaac whispered that he didn't want to go to another house. Hannah clung to Mary's skirt, shaking. Benjamin paced like a trapped animal, kicking the wall until dust fell from the ceiling. Mary gathered them in her arms, pulling all of them close, whispering their names like a shield, like a prayer. They will not take you, she said. They will not. But she wasn't sure. Not this time. 2 nights later, Mrs. Hale arrived. It was not a polite visit. Mary woke to the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel path and footsteps crushing the wet grass. She stepped outside to find Margaret Hale standing in front of her house, wrapped in a dark shawl, her face pale with fury. 2 overseers flanked her, their lanterns casting sharp shadows. You ruined my family, Margaret hissed before Mary could speak. You ruined my marriage. Mary remained silent. You let my husband put his hands on you, she continued. You let him shame me. Mary's voice was quiet. He forced me. Margaret spat on the ground. Women like you can't be forced. You're filth. You're temptation. You're the reason men sin. Mary felt a tremor of anger rise in her chest. You blame the wrong person. Margaret's eyes blazed with hatred. I blame the one who spread her legs every time he knocked. Mary's breath caught, not from the insult, but from the cruelty dripping from each word like venom. Margaret stepped forward, her voice lowering. You think the county pities you? They don't. They want you gone. And when the hearing comes, we will take your children, because a woman like you cannot raise them. You won't, Mary said, her voice breaking despite herself. You won't take them. Margaret's smile was thin and sharp. You have already lost. She turned and walked away, leaving Mary standing barefoot in the cold mud. The overseers lingered a moment longer. One whispered to the other, loud enough for Mary to hear. In 2 weeks she'll be begging on the street. Mary closed the door behind her and locked it. She slid to the floor, her back against the wood, her breath shallow and uneven. She felt as though the walls of her home were closing in, the air thickening, the future collapsing. She realized something terrifying. There was no winning. Not in the courts. Not in the county. Not against a man like Hale and a woman like Margaret. The only path left was the one she had spent her whole life avoiding. Running. Leaving everything she knew behind. Choosing danger over destruction. Choosing flight over surrender. That night, when the children were asleep, Mary packed what little food they had into a cloth sack. She gathered blankets, water jugs, a small knife, spare clothes. She woke Anna and whispered for her to gather the others quietly. Benjamin understood instantly. Grace began crying softly. Joshua asked where they were going. Isaac clung to Mary's waist. Hannah whimpered, half asleep. Mary knelt in the center of the room and spoke words she had never imagined she would say. We're leaving tonight. If we stay, they will take you from me. And I will die before I let that happen. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with finality. She looked around at the faces of her children, frightened, confused, trusting, and felt something shift inside her. She wouldn't run away like a coward. She would run like a mother ready to burn the entire state of Virginia, before surrendering her children to the people who wanted to destroy them. She blew out the candle, opened the door to the night, and stepped into the darkness with all 9 children behind her. The road ahead was long. The danger was certain, but Mary Cole had made her decision, and once she made it, she never looked back. The night Mary Cole fled Mulberry Road was the kind of night that seemed to swallow sound. No moon, no stars, only a thick blanket of darkness pressing against the trees, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. The children followed her in a narrow lane, clutching blankets, bags, and each other. Their footsteps were soft, hurried, uncertain. But Mary's was certain. She walked fast, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that it had to be far, far from the plantation, far from Hale, far from the courthouse where men would sit and decide the fate of her children, as casually as they decided the price of grain. Freedom was not a place she had ever seen, but tonight it was the only direction she could walk. The forest closed around them like a tunnel. Branches brushed against their clothes. Leaves whispered beneath their feet. Animals moved somewhere in the dark, watching them with cautious curiosity. Even the wind felt different, as if it carried warnings he couldn't hear. Mary kept count as they moved, whispering each name like a heartbeat to steady herself. Anna, Benjamin, Grace, Joshua, Isaac, Hannah, Sarah, Thomas, 8 present. Lucy gone. Samuel gone. The road stretched forward. The past followed close behind. By dawn, they reached the river. It cut through the land like a silver blade, wide and restless, its cold water rushing over rocks with a voice that could swallow whispers. Mary stopped on the bank, looking across the surface. On the other side lay the old Northern Trail, a path that led out of Virginia and toward the border of Maryland. Rumor said abolitionists traveled that route, guiding runaway slaves to safer farms. She wasn't a slave. Her children weren't either. But in this state, the difference meant nothing. They needed to cross. Benjamin was the first to speak. "We can't swim 9 people across. We don't have a choice," Mary said. Anna stepped beside her. "The water's too strong." Mary clenched her jaw. "We'll make it. God help us, we will." Grace began to cry softly. Hannah whimpered, rubbing her eyes. Isaac stared at the river with a frightened stillness. Mary squeezed their hands. "Stay close to me. No one lets go." She pushed into the water first, the icy shock biting through her bones. The river tugged at her dress, pulling her forward with a force that made her heart pound. Benjamin waded beside her, breathing hard, helping the younger children find their footing. The deeper they went, the louder the river became. The current swirled around their legs, their waists, their chests. The smallest children clung to Mary and Benjamin like frightened birds. Halfway across, the current surged. Hannah's feet slipped. Her cry tore through the morning air, sharp enough to shatter Mary's breath. "Hannah!" Mary lunged, gripping the girl's arm. But the river twisted, dragging Hannah sideways. Benjamin grabbed her other wrist, pulling with all his strength. But another surge of water slammed into them, forcing Benjamin to stagger. And then, Hannah's hand slipped free. The river swallowed her with a sound Mary would remember for the rest of her life. "No, no!" Mary screamed, fighting the current, pushing forward, diving after her daughter's small, thrashing shape. But the river was faster, stronger, merciless. Hannah's head appeared once, twice, then vanished beneath the foam. Mary plunged deeper, claws scraping through water, lungs burning. But her fingers found nothing, only cold, empty currents rushing past. Benjamin grabbed her from behind, his voice breaking. "Mama, you'll drown. Let me go." Mary fought violently, sobbing, choking on river water. "Let me go." But Benjamin held on. He wrapped his arms around her waist as tightly as he could until Anna reached them too, her own voice trembling. "Mama, we can't lose you too, Mama. Please." Their pleas cut through her grief like knives. Mary let her legs go limp and allowed them to drag her toward the riverbank. The moment her knees touched the mud, she collapsed forward, trembling, gasping, her heart screaming inside her chest. "Hannah, Hannah," but the river took only silence. They sat on the bank for nearly an hour, while the morning sun climbed through the trees. The children huddled together, shivering, crying in worn-out, broken sobs. Benjamin stared at the ground, shaking. Grace curled against Mary's chest. Isaac whispered Hannah's name over and over, as if saying it might call her back. Mary didn't speak. She couldn't. Her voice had drowned with her daughter. But time did not stop, even for grief. And before they could gather the strength to stand, the sound of horses cut through the trees. Distant. Growing louder. Hale's men. Mary felt her body jolt with raw terror. We have to move. But Hannah sobbed. Mary lifted her daughter's face and whispered with a cracked voice. She's gone. But the rest of you, I can still save. They rose, every movement heavy, and continued down the trail. But they weren't walking alone. The sound of pursuit grew closer, echoing through the woods like thunder. Benjamin looked back and swore under his breath. They're coming, Mama. Faster, Mary said. They ran, stumbling, exhausted, soaked, terrified. Branches tore at their arms. Mud clung to their shoes. Breath rasped in their throats. But they ran, until a familiar figure stepped out from the trees. A man, tall, dark skin, warm clothes, injured leg. Mary froze. Samuel. He looked like a ghost, thinner, limping, his shirt torn, his cheek bruised, his wrists scarred from chains. But his eyes, those soft, steady eyes Mary had loved, they were still alive. She staggered toward him and nearly collapsed in his arms. How? She whispered. I escaped, he said breathlessly. I followed your tracks. I knew you'd run north. He looked behind them. And I knew he'd follow. The sound of horses cracked through the trees again. Closer now, violent, certain. Samuel's voice hardened. They're less than a mile behind. We have minutes. Maybe less. Benjamin stepped forward. We can fight. No, Samuel said. We run. And if running fails, he didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. Mary grabbed his hand. Please help me save them. I will, he whispered. With my life. And he meant it. The forest thinned as they neared the old Maryland line. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Ahead, a ridge of rocks marked the boundary where the trail dipped into a narrow pass. If they could reach it, there was a chance, a small chance, they could lose Hale's men. But just as they reached the ridge, the sound of horses erupted behind them. Closer, faster, relentless. Then came the voices. There, up ahead. Don't let them escape. Benjamin grabbed Grace's hand and pulled her forward. Anna herded the younger children ahead. Mary and Samuel stayed behind them, pushing as fast as their shaken bodies allowed. A gunshot tore through the air. The children screamed. Samuel spun, shoving Mary aside, just as the bullet ripped near her shoulder and shattered against the stones. Go, he roared. Go. Mary grabbed the children and forced them up the ridge. Another shot rang out, striking the dirt near Samuel's feet. He didn't flinch. Instead, he charged toward the men on horseback, picking up a fallen branch like a spear. Samuel, no! Mary screamed. But he didn't stop. He turned once, meeting her eyes with a look she would carry like a brand on her soul. It was love, pure, unbreakable, final. Then he attacked. The riders swarmed him. Shouts filled the forest. Hooves crashed. Another gunshot exploded. Mary saw Samuel fall to his knees, then to the ground. The horses trampled the earth around him, and the world seemed to tilt. He wasn't moving. She wanted to run to him, to scream, to fight. But Benjamin grabbed her arm. Mama, we can't. We can't. Gunshots echoed again. They ran. Up the ridge. Down the pass. Through thorns that tore their skin. Through branches that ripped at their clothes. Mary didn't look back. She couldn't. If she did, she knew she'd never move again. But the forest opened. The northern trail stretched ahead. Hope, faint, flickering, appeared like a distant candle. And then, just when freedom felt close enough to touch, more riders emerged from the opposite end of the pass. Not Hale's men. Maryland patrol, trained to catch runaways. The children froze. Mary's breath caught like a blade between her ribs. The patrol leader raised a lantern, Stop where you are. Benjamin stepped in front of his siblings. Leave us alone. They didn't. Within minutes the family was surrounded. Mary fought like an animal, screaming, clawing, trying to reach her children as the riders dismounted. But they overpowered her easily. Benjamin bit one of the men until blood ran down his arm. Anna kicked and screamed. Grace sobbed until her voice cracked. Isaac hid beneath Mary, refusing to let go until they tore him away. The patrol didn't know their story. They didn't care. They saw only a group of runaways crossing state lines. They acted as instructed. The boys, Benjamin, Joshua, Isaac, were taken to labor farms. The girls, Anna, Grace, Sarah, Hannah gone, Lucy gone, Hannah lost, and tiny Hannah's absence echoing like a wound, were assigned to orphan houses. Mary herself was arrested for attempted escape, immorality, and child endangerment. Her children disappeared into separate wagons, their screams shredding the forest. Mama! Please, Mama! Don't let them take us! Mama, help! Mary roared, kicked, fought until her wrists bled, until her voice broke. But the world didn't bend for a mother's grief. The wagons rolled away, one by one, until the road was empty, and Mary Cole lay in the dirt, surrounded by silence. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. One name, then another, then another. Hannah, Samuel, Lucy. The world had taken them all, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a mother's shattered heart. And in the end, when the county whispered her story, they didn't speak her children's names with tenderness. They spoke them like judgment, like warning, like sin. They never understood the truth. Mary didn't run because she was wicked. She ran because she loved. She ran because she believed a mother could outrun the cruelty of men. She ran because she wanted her children to live. But Virginia did not let mothers like her win, and the road north swallowed her story the same way the river swallowed her daughter. Silently, completely, forever.